My name is Leo, and about 5 years ago I hit a wall. I was working a high-stress tech job in Boston, the kind of career that promises a future but slowly devours your present. The city itself had become a source of anxiety. The constant hum of traffic, the relentless pace, the feeling of being perpetually surrounded by millions of other people. I craved silence, the kind of deep, total quiet you can only find far away from humanity. My search for an escape led me to a rather unusual opportunity, a temporary 3-month position as a lighthouse keeper. The ad was posted on a small maritime forum, looking for a temporary replacement on a tiny, uninhabited island off the coast of Maine. The island was a mere speck on the map, a solid granite outpost with nothing but a single squat stone lighthouse, an old weather station, and a small rickety boathouse. The job was simple: keep the light running, log the daily weather patterns, and perform basic maintenance. It was the perfect escape, a chance to be truly, utterly alone. I accepted the job without a second thought. For the first week, it was everything I had hoped for, and more. The solitude was a physical thing, a heavy blanket of peace that settled over me the moment the supply boat left. I spent my time reading, writing in my journal, and watching the endless waves of the North Atlantic crash against the rugged shore. The only sounds were the cawing of gulls, the roar of the ocean, and the occasional groan of the old lighthouse structure settling. The isolation was a form of therapy, a way to decompress and let the city's noise fade from my mind. I was a man who had everything he needed and nothing he didn't. I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. Then, a few nights into my stay, the quiet started to feel a little too deep, a little too complete. It was around 2 a.m. when I was doing my nightly check on the radio. The old two-way was meant for emergency broadcasts and communication with passing vessels, but I'd often turn it on just to hear some human voices, even if it was just snippets of shipping chatter or weather reports. That night, there was nothing. Total static. But then, in the faint hiss of the white noise, I heard it. A faint, drawn-out sound, like a distorted whisper on the very edge of hearing. It was so soft, so ethereal, I thought I had imagined it. I adjusted the dial, trying to tune it out, but it lingered. It wasn't a word, just a low, sibilant sound, like someone breathing heavily into the microphone from a long distance. I told myself it was just a radio malfunction, maybe some atmospheric interference bouncing a signal off a distant ionosphere. I shrugged it off and went to bed. The next night, it happened again, but this time, I was more attentive. I was sitting in my small living quarters, reading by the light of a kerosene lamp, when the radio suddenly crackled to life with that same sound. I listened closely, holding my breath, and there it was again, clearer now. Not just a sound, but a single elongated syllable, a drawn-out H-E-L-L-O. It was low, raspy, and filled with a chilling emptiness. It sent a deep, icy shiver down my spine. I was the only person on the island. The nearest inhabited island was over 10 miles away. Who could it be? I turned off the radio and just sat in the dark for a long time, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I couldn't sleep that night. The following days, the whispers started to become more frequent, appearing out of nowhere when I least expected them. Sometimes it was just a low murmur, like a distant conversation I couldn't quite make out. Other times it was a single word, always something simple and unsettling, like cold or here. My solitude, which had been a comfort, now felt like a cage. I started feeling like I was being watched, not in the paranoid way you feel in an empty house, but in a heavy, physical sense, as if something was just outside my line of sight, a breath away from being seen. The ocean seemed darker, the silence heavier. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. I tried to convince myself I was just going stir-crazy from the isolation, a common affliction for lighthouse keepers in the old days, but I knew in my gut it was something more. The true escalation began on a Tuesday. I was up in the lantern room, meticulously polishing the massive Fresnel lens. The mechanism that rotated the light was a marvel of old-world engineering, and I enjoyed the hypnotic rhythm of its slow spin. Suddenly, the main light flickered. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The generators were running perfectly. I had just checked them. The light was on a backup circuit, designed to be fail-safe. I went to the control panel, but all the diagnostics were green, and the voltage was steady. I was completely baffled. After a few minutes, the light stabilized. I went downstairs to the living quarters for a break, but when I came back up, a maintenance logbook that I had left open and face down on the table was now closed and sitting neatly on top of a stack of other books. I was the only person on this tiny island. There was no way the wind could have done that. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I started to hear the whispers outside the radio. I was checking the engine room in the basement and I heard my name. Leo. Leo. Whispered from the dark shadows just past the glow of my flashlight. I whipped around, my light darting into the darkness, but there was nothing. The voice was so close, right behind me, but it was just air, a disembodied sound that vanished as soon as I turned. It all came to a horrifying climax during a night of heavy fog, the kind of fog that swallows the world, where the light from the tower just dissipates into a thick, milky wall a few feet from the lens. I was up in the lantern room, watching the light cut its slow, methodical path through the gray, feeling a sense of unease I'd never felt before. The whispers were a chorus now, a cacophony of low, indistinct voices that seemed to be coming from all around me, inside the walls, from the swirling fog outside, from my very own mind. It felt like I was standing in the middle of a crowd of silent ghosts, all of them waiting, watching. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I looked down at the rough, jagged rocks at the base of the lighthouse, and through a brief, thin patch in the fog, I saw it. A figure, dark and indistinct, standing perfectly still on a small outcrop of rock. It was looking up at the tower, right at me. I was paralyzed with fear. I rubbed my eyes, and when I looked back, the fog had rolled in again, and it was gone. Just a brief gap in the swirling mist, a momentary glimpse of something that shouldn't have been there. I was filled with an animal panic. I spun around, and that's when I felt it. A presence, heavy and silent, right behind me, like a hand was just about to settle on my shoulder. I didn't see anything, but I felt a cold, crushing weight in the air, a malevolent energy that pressed down on me. It was the feeling of being hunted, of being cornered, of being finally, irrevocably found. I bolted from the room, my feet clattering on the metal stairs, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't grab my bags, my phone, nothing. I got to the boathouse, fumbling with the keys to the motorboat. I started the engine and tore out into the fog, leaving the light of the tower to be swallowed by the night. I didn't stop until I saw the faint lights of the mainland, and even then, I couldn't bring myself to slow down. I never went back. I never told anyone the full story. Not really. I just said the solitude wasn't for me, that it was too intense. But sometimes, on a quiet night, when the wind howls outside my apartment in Boston, I can still hear a faint whisper on the wind, a single drawn-out syllable that sounds just like my name, Leo ... The isolation wasn't what scared me. It was what used the isolation to get to me. My name is Adam. I grew up just south of Portland, Oregon, and the old Tillamook Rock Lighthouse has always been a legend in my family. It's a derelict, half-collapsed lighthouse, perched on a desolate rock a mile offshore from the coast near Cannon Beach. It was decommissioned decades ago, and the last keepers left some incredible stories behind. My grandfather, who passed away last year, was one of the final keepers. He used to tell me stories about the place, about the profound isolation and the constant, violent battle against the Pacific Ocean. He'd say the place was more than just a building. It had a spirit, a memory of its own. After he passed, I felt a strong, almost spiritual pull to go back. I took his old binoculars, a small bag of gear, and drove out to the coast near Cannon Beach. I wasn't planning on going to the lighthouse itself. That would have been insane, but I wanted to see it up close again, especially with a huge storm rolling in. It felt like the right thing to do, a way to connect with his memory. The weather had been eerily calm all day, but by the time I reached the old coastal road, the sky had turned a bruised purple and the air was thick with static electricity. The wind was whipping the trees into a frenzy, and the waves were starting to crash against the shore with a deafening, terrifying roar. I parked my truck at a small rocky cove where the old service dock for the lighthouse was located. It was just a few rotting planks now, barely visible in the churning water. As I stood there, bracing against the wind, trying to take in the sheer, destructive power of the ocean, I noticed something that sent a sharp jolt of alarm through me. Tied to one of the dock pilings, bobbing violently in the tumultuous waves, was a small, beat-up skiff. It was old and unregistered, and there was no one in sight. Why would anyone be out here in this weather? I told myself it must belong to a local fisherman, but it felt wrong. The dock was practically a skeleton, a death trap. No one in their right mind would use it in these conditions, much less try to anchor to it. My curiosity, or maybe a sense of foreboding, won out over my better judgment. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking the narrow, overgrown trail that followed the cliffside toward the old lighthouse keeper's house. The rain started to fall in heavy, angry sheets, and the wind howled so loud it was almost a physical presence. The house was boarded up and looked like a ghost, its windows like empty eyes. I got closer to the main lighthouse tower, a massive, looming black shape against the darkening sky. That's when I saw it. The massive, iron-reinforced door to the lighthouse, which I knew for a fact was always chained and padlocked by the Historical Society, was ajar. Just a few inches, enough to show a sliver of inky darkness. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. I hesitated for a long moment, my rational mind screaming at me to turn back. But the memory of my grandfather, of his stories about the place, was a powerful motivator. I pushed the door open, a long, rusty creak echoing in the roar of the wind. Inside, the air was cold and stale, thick with the smell of salt and decay. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone in here?" No response. I was about to turn around and leave when I heard a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A faint, high-pitched singing. A tune I couldn't quite place was coming from somewhere high up inside the tower. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the spiral staircase. The sound was so faint, almost a phantom, but it was there. I started to ascend, my boots echoing on the metal steps with each step. The singing got louder, but it was still soft, almost a lullaby, but with a deeply unsettling, discordant tone. As I neared the top, I saw a faint, pulsing glow coming from the lantern room. The light, which had been off for years, was on, a dim yellow glow that pulsed with the sound of the singing, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I reached the top landing, and my blood ran cold. Standing in the middle of the lantern room, with his back to me, was a man. He was dressed in what looked like an old, tattered keeper's uniform, but it was soaking wet and torn. He was humming the unsettling tune, swaying slightly from side to side. I tried to speak, to ask him who he was, but the words caught in my throat. I just stood there, paralyzed by a creeping dread. "Sir?" I finally managed to whisper. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, swaying slightly with the rhythm of his hum, his silhouette a haunting shape against the dim yellow light. The wind outside roared, shaking the very foundation of the tower, making the entire room shudder. I saw something in the glass of the lantern, a brief, distorted reflection of his face. His eyes were wide and milky white, and his mouth was a perfect silent O, as if he was in perpetual shock or screaming without sound. I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated terror. He wasn't just a visitor. There was something profoundly, supernaturally wrong with him. The humming stopped. The silence that followed was more deafening than the storm. My stomach dropped into my shoes. I bolted, stumbling down the metal stairs, not looking back. I burst through the front door and ran through the torrential rain, back toward the coastal road. The wind screamed in my ears, but all I could hear was the phantom hum and the feeling of those wide, milky eyes on my back. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. I fumbled with the keys, started the engine, and peeled out of there. I drove for miles along the winding, deserted coastal road, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. But as I finally calmed down, I saw something in the distance. From the top of the dark, menacing lighthouse, a single brief light flashed. It was a rhythmic pulse, like a signal. I turned a bend in the road, and when I looked back, I saw the light again. A quick flash, but this time it seemed to be following me, moving along the coast. It was impossible, but I saw it. I sped up, my heart pounding, and after a few more miles, I looked in the mirror one last time. The light was gone. I slowed down, my hands shaking on the wheel. It was just a brief moment. A trick of the light, I told myself. A hallucination brought on by panic. But as I pulled into my driveway hours later, a full, rhythmic light flashed in the distance behind me. The sound of the hum, a small, unsettling lullaby, seemed to echo in the dead of the night. My name is Elias, and I've always had a morbid fascination with places left to rot. I'm a photographer, specializing in what's known as urbex, urban exploration. For me, it's not about vandalism or trespassing for the thrill. It's about capturing the quiet, decaying beauty of places, forgotten by time. So when I stumbled upon the coordinates of the old Blackwater Point Lighthouse, it felt like I'd found the holy grail of my craft. Located on a desolate, marshy stretch of coastline in Oregon, the lighthouse was so far off the grid that it didn't even have a name on most modern maps. It had been abandoned since the 1950s, after a storm of unprecedented ferocity had knocked out its power and claimed the lives of its last two keepers, who were never found. The local legends painted a grim picture, a place of tragedy, of silent storms, and of things that don't stay dead. I rented a small, beat-up skiff from a fisherman, who, upon hearing my destination, just gave me a long, silent look and a low whistle. "Don't get lost out there, son," he said, the Salton Sea ingrained in his weathered face. "The marsh has a way of holding on to what it takes." I shrugged off his warning as the superstitious rambling of an old seaman, paid him, and set off. The journey was eerily calm. The water was a flat, gray mirror, and the thick, humid air hung heavy with the smell of decay. After a few hours, the lighthouse rose from the mist, a skeletal finger of stone against the bruised sky. It was magnificent and terrifying all at once. The salt and spray had long since stripped away the white paint, leaving it a dark, mottled gray. Its windows, long since shattered, were like empty sockets, and the large, iron-reinforced door at its base hung crookedly on a single, rusted hinge. I spent the first few hours meticulously photographing the exterior. I captured the rust-streaked walls, the gnarled trees clinging to the rocky shore, and the eerie way the marsh grass seemed to wave in the non-existent wind. I made my way to the door and, with a metallic groan, pushed it open. The air inside was cold, stale, and smelled of mold and salt. The silence was absolute, broken only by the click of my camera's shutter. I walked into the main entry room, where a spiral staircase snaked its way up into the darkness. As I was about to go up, I noticed something strange on the stone wall. Faint, deep scratches, like someone had tried to gouge out the stone with their bare hands. They started at waist height and went all the way up the wall, stopping abruptly. A chill ran down my spine, but I dismissed it as old graffiti or perhaps the work of a vandal. I told myself that every abandoned place has its own stories, its own secrets. I ascended the stairs, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The higher I climbed, the more the air grew thick and heavy, as if I was pushing through an invisible wall of resistance. The walls of the staircase were covered in a thin, greasy film. It was strangely consistent, and as I shone my flashlight on it, I noticed a pattern. It was a repeating series of lines, like tally marks, but they were jagged and uneven. They weren't drawn with a pencil or a pen. They were scratched into the surface of the wall itself, dug deep by something sharp. I reached the first room, a former living quarter. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but in the center of the room, there was a perfect circle of absence, a patch of floor that was completely clean. It looked as if someone had recently wiped it clean, but there were no footprints, no marks, no sign of life. My hands started to shake, and I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I was the only person on this desolate piece of land. The weirdness escalated on the second floor. This was the keeper's office, a small room with a desk and a chair. On the desk, I saw a notebook, open to a page filled with frantic, hurried handwriting. I flipped through the pages, and my blood ran cold. It was a logbook, a series of increasingly desperate journal entries from a former keeper, chronicling his descent into madness. "The silence is a sound," one entry read. "It's a low hum, a whisper I can't quite hear, but I feel it in my bones." Another entry was even more chilling. "The ocean isn't loud enough anymore. It screams, but the whispers are louder. They told me I'm not alone. They told me they're waiting for me. I'm going to turn off the light. I'm going to join them." The final entry was a single word, scrawled in thick black ink that looked like it had been smeared with a thumb. "Found." The handwriting then abruptly ended, followed by a series of long, deep scratches that ran all the way across the page. I slammed the book shut, my heart hammering in my chest. The story was a local legend, a ghost story told to scare tourists, but seeing it in ink, in a real notebook, made it far too real. I felt a sudden, profound sense of panic. This place wasn't just abandoned, it was haunted. I felt an icy presence, a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, my flashlight darting across the room. Nothing. But the air around me grew colder, heavier. I heard a faint whisper, a low, sibilant sound that was just on the edge of my hearing. It was coming from the floor above me, from the lantern room. The whisper grew louder, a chorus of voices, all of them low and indistinct. They were a symphony of silence, a cacophony of quiet. I felt my sanity slipping away. I had to get out of there. I ran down the stairs, my boots clattering on the metal steps. I didn't care about my camera, my gear, nothing. All I wanted was to get out. I burst through the front door and ran through the marsh, my feet sinking into the muddy ground. I didn't look back until I reached my boat and started the engine. The lighthouse was a dark silhouette against the last vestiges of twilight, a malevolent shadow on the horizon. But then, as I began to motor away, I saw it. A single, brief light. A faint, pulsing yellow glow flashed from the top of the lantern room. It was on for a second, then gone. Then it flashed again, brighter this time, a rhythmic pulse. It was a signal, a wave. It was saying goodbye. I froze, my hands shaking on the wheel. The legend of the two keepers had come to life, and I was watching their ghosts from the safety of my boat. The light pulsed again, then a third time, then a fourth, each flash growing brighter, more frantic, more insistent. I felt a cold dread as I saw something in the glass of the lantern, a distorted reflection of a face, a human face. Then it was gone, and the light went out. The lighthouse was once again a dark, silent sentinel, a tomb. I put the boat in full throttle and tore through the water, leaving the sinister glow of the lighthouse far behind. I never looked back. I still have the photos I took that day, the ones of the peeling paint and the weathered stone. But when I look at them now, I don't see a beautiful, decaying building. I see a tomb, a place of silent screams, and I hear a faint whisper on the wind, a whisper that tells me I was lucky to get out alive.